Hello, and welcome to your monthly podcast brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Virginia, Confessions from the Voting Booth. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization, and we will never endorse or campaign for candidates, which means hashtag. We are issue driven and party blind. Our mission is simple: empowering voters and defending democracy, which means hashtag making democracy work for everyone. For our audience, we will have a 30-minute chat from community organizers and activists about voting access issues that are on the ballot and other matters pertaining to elections that are of importance to you, the listener. I'm Denise Harrington, your host today, and let me get ready to introduce our wonderful two guests. Our guests today are former directors of William and Mary Disinfolab, a technology and politics think tank. At the lab, they led multidisciplinary research on our information environment, including bias in AI, the spread of pro-Russian disinformation in Eastern Europe, and the role of social media algorithms in promoting false narratives. Now, after years of researching myths and disinformation, our two folks today are building software to combat it. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a great big round of applause for Aaraj Vij and Jeremy Swack. Yay! Listen, this mis and disinformation is of great importance to our members in the League of Women Voters. And I just want to say thank you so much for agreeing to do this and for really stepping up. All of us have seen a little smidgen of some kind of a presentation about mis and disinformation, but we don't really know exactly how it works, what's really behind it. And so we are definitely interested in what you have to say. So, but my first question is, instead of just kind of what really motivates you to do this work, why did you really decide to dive deep into this? Either one of you can answer.
Thanks, Denise. I can take this one. First, want to say it's a pleasure to be here. It's been wonderful working with the Virginia League for the past year now. Jeremy and I have both learned a lot and really enjoyed being in the process. Jeremy and I are young. We have grown up in a very, very polarized political environment. It's basically all that we've known. Um, and for a long time, I think what that meant was that, regardless of where you lie on the political spectrum, there's certain challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone wants to solve those challenges, but we might disagree on the best way to get there. And I think that a really transformative moment for both of us was the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic,
Yes.
where back in 2020, we have this really big issue. It's very scary. And instead of it bringing us together, we see ourselves divided. And a lot of the division was not necessarily rooted on what's the best way to combat COVID-19. It was rooted on, is COVID-19 even real? And then
Mm.
when vaccines came out, the debate became, are COVID-19 vaccines actually effective? And so I think, what was so transformative there is the conversation shifted away from what's the best way to solve this problem to, is the problem actually real? Does it even exist in the first place?
Now,
And
I just want to comment on that for a little bit. That is extremely important. And I was just thinking back, and our listeners, I'm sure when they hear this, they're going to think, what? And then we're all going to think back to, um, yes, first, and then we heard people telling people don't take vaccines This can happen to you. It can stop here. They can do this to you. And then, yet, we were sitting and watching in New York City um, with the body bags, unfortunately, piling up in
Mhm.
very densely populated areas. And so I think you just hit the nail on the head about first it was, okay, we have this problem. How can we all come together and solve it? Oh, well, is it really a problem? Or is this something? And then you hear these people talking about vaccines.
Mhm.
So continue to walk us through it. But I wanted our audience to catch up a little bit because I want them to really visualize what you're saying because you're absolutely right.
Absolutely. I appreciate it, Denise. Um, so COVID-19 definitely a big factor. And then secondly was the presidential election back in 2020. As soon as the election happens, at this point, I'm part of Disinfolab. I'm monitoring social media information and narratives that are spreading. And I see this, onslaught of false, baseless narratives that the election was stolen, it was rigged, and at that point, it was a research project. But then January 6th happens. And Jeremy and I are both from Northern Virginia, so this is happening in our backyard at the Capitol building. And we see that these narratives that we've been researching and tracking for the last few months, using Twitter data, has now translated into a violent mob that broke into the Capitol building. And at
Okay.
that point, we realized that we've really, really come to a different moment, in like our information environment and our political environment.
Mhm.
And it's not slated to get any better. Social media is definitely a strong vector for these misleading narratives. I think that both COVID-19 and January 6th showed that social media has really, really real impacts. And I'd say that that's why Jeremy and I have dedicated the last 4 years to combating this issue.
You made me think of two things, and I have to bring them up. And as our audience can obviously see, um, I'm a little bit different generation. I'm on the cusp of the baby boomers. I'm like one of the last years or something like that. But you know what you made me think of? There are two things. My mother used to have an expression: if you tell a lie long enough, even the devil will believe it. And I think that you have hit on the pulse of that, of mis and disinformation. Because if you say something, having done political work myself, if you say something long enough, then people will begin to think it's true. And then they'll be undoubtedly think it's true. And you really address, quote, the big lie. And that's what it's really being called. Um, and then we have seen threats again, even about this next presidential election that's coming up. And so that's a very good point. You gave two very relevant examples: the last presidential election, and then you gave another good example of just COVID-19. And there's still people are still debating about COVID-19, but yet, um, if you talk to people, as I was in a organization, a little small nonprofit, and people saw their relatives in New York City and some of the other densely populated places passed, and there was nothing they could do. A 9-year-old that passed recently, and that this is a very real. So that's very. But let's clear up a little bit for our audience. What is the difference between misinformation and disinformation?
Sure thing. The so both mis and disinformation deal with false information. The difference really boils down to intent. So misinformation is false information that is not intentionally spread for that purpose, whereas disinformation is false information that's knowingly spread with an intent to deceive.
And that's an excellent point. With an intent to
Mhm.
deceive, it's kind of like if I said to you, if you said put your age down on a form, and I said that I'm 25 years old, you would laugh. That would be a good joke. But if you said, "Oh, put down that you're 65," and I purposefully wanted to deceive you, and I'm not 65, by the way. It's still a deception. Not there yet. But so that's really good. But I would really ask both of you what really, and you mentioned just two monumental things in our history, and I'm so sorry, and forgive me if I'm from the a child of the Cold War era, if you will. Um, Two uncles passing in World War II I've never known for my mother's side, and one uncle on my father's side who passed as a result um, of being in World War II, whom I never knew. But I've, pictures of him, and my uncle would talk about him, my dad too. So my next question is, during that era, those of us remember Khrushchev, because back then the big enemy was Russia. And I know you mentioned Russian mis and disinformation online. Khrushchev said, "We will destroy America from within." And you gave us just two examples. COVID-19 should have united us. We should have been, we're going to fight this. And as a child who benefited from those Depression generation parents who said, stick out your arm, you're getting smallpox, you're getting the polio vaccine. Because I even had teachers who had problems because they had had polio when they were young. And polio to us, our generation was, what's that? That's something you old people talk about. You know? What's smallpox? What's that? What's that, George Washington days or something? We just, we didn't know these diseases. Measles and mumps, some, but we didn't know about those diseases because we got vaccinated. And common sense went out the window. But that's my next question. What keeps you all up at night about mis and disinformation?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here and talk a little bit about that. I think for myself and Aaraj, it's really about how the spread of mis and disinformation has really changed and been accelerated, particularly over the last 5 to 10 years. I mean, you were describing some, you know, uh, situations where there's been mis and disinformation at play, but it didn't have the uh, velocity of something like social media to accelerate the spread of it. I think that's really what we've seen studying disinformation for the past 4 plus years, is that there are all these new paradigms in how people are consuming information that's really having a huge impact on the information space as a whole. When it comes to the 2020 election or COVID-19, I think we're fairly confident that the fact that social media is so deeply ingrained into particularly young people's lives and really people of all ages' lives has a huge impact in how the kinds of information people are getting, the quality of information people are getting, and the speed at which they're getting it. Um, so I think that's something me and Arj really grapple with quite a bit is, realizing that people are getting information in very different ways than they used to even 10, 20 years ago. And what we can really do to meet people where they're at. Um, because where people get their information is just totally different nowadays. And, um, we have to do our best to understand that.
I think that is very interesting. And I think once again, you all, that's why you do what you do, because, once you hear, I have to say, once Michael Jackson passed, um, I immediately got a text from my sister. I'm like, nah, this is all fake. This is false. And then I had other news station apps. It was pulling up on my phone. It was everything. And I finally said, oh, this is really real then. And so, what you're really saying, what we consider and expect from technology today, instant, I would almost call it instant gratification, if you will, um, and us not bothering to check the source of where it's coming from has now been part of our downfall. And I like something that you talked about how we consume information and the speed and the, how rapid it is that it just spreads. It's like it's one seed and then it just goes out. So that's very interesting. Very good point. And so my next question, in the League of Women Voters, we are absolutely focused on elections and we talk about empowering voters. But how do you think the recent advancements in AI will impact election mis and disinformation?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a question really everyone is focused on with all the recent developments in artificial intelligence. Um, and I want to talk both about, I think, what AI can do for good and what AI can do for bad. And I'll start with the bad, to end on a good note. Um, but in terms of what artificial intelligence can do to, kind of undermine this fundamental democratic process of elections, is it really comes down to a few different technologies that have really become extremely, extremely powerful within the past few years. The one is the development of these large language models. If uh, anyone's seen news about ChatGPT or OpenAI,
Yes.
um,
Mm-hmm.
these new kinds of models that can produce text that really sounds like it's from a human, um, is just something we've not seen before. There have been models that have tried to do this in the past, but they just haven't done it with the level of quality that we're seeing today. And this kind of technology, well, it can absolutely do a lot of good. It also allows bad actors who are looking to spread a particular narrative or particular idea, whether it be on social media or even through traditional news means. Um, it allows them to do it cheaper with less people and faster. I think that's something everyone needs to be really aware of, particularly as they're consuming really any kind of information, but particularly information about the election, of where it's coming from, knowing that this kind of technology is out there. I think that's, something we're only going to see more of. And then along with that kind of technology, there's also the creation of fake images and fake videos and things like that, deep fake. And this is another thing where it can completely kind of change the information space because it's so believable. Anyone can create a photoshopped images or these AI programs that can create artificially generated images and videos. It's hard to believe. Um, that can be really powerful in swaying an
Mm-hmm.
opinion. I think being cognizant of this technology is really the most important thing, knowing that it's out there, that you have that level of skepticism when you're reading something or looking at an image or a video, so that you know to think twice about what you're seeing.
I'm glad you brought that up. You made me think of two recent images or what have you that came up in the press. And of course, one was Caitlin Middleton. Um, and when people said that they were photoshopping, they knew she had gotten out of the hospital. And then they knew it was because of that keenness that you just mentioned. They knew it was Photoshop. And then they put two more images of touched up photos and everything. And they just continued. And finally, the truth came out. And that's very interesting that you brought that up because um, I myself was dealing with someone who was an avid Trump supporter in the last election and said to me, "Oh gosh, I really hate Kamala Harris." And I said, "Why?" And they sent me something on the phone. And she's talking about how she was going to tear up military health care and give it to these people and that. Now, the caption was there in writing, but her face was looking the other way or something. And it was a little smirk. And I said, wait a minute, if she's talking about a subject like that and she's looking away and so on. So when I did a presentation about that, and then this person first said, well, I don't like her because she's saying, and then finally I said, call your IT person. They will tell you that's Photoshop. It's within 5 seconds of texting his person, he's the person is a IT person. They said, "Oh, we know this is fake. Look, her head here is this, the lighting is that." They had all the technical terms down to a science. And obviously the British people knew something was going on because I couldn't tell, yay or nay. But so what if I hear you correctly, we have to be diligent. And then the other thing that you made me think of is someone had put something out about President Biden's voice supposedly saying something. And I know people do the same thing with Trump, and they have all these images and things like that. So this is really rough. So the next question talks about how would either one of you recommend we, those of us who are not tech savvy or IT savvy, protect ourselves from election mis and disinformation? How can we protect ourselves?
I can take this one. I think that when it comes to protecting ourselves, um, we should first take a step back and think about why is mis and disinformation such a problem? And I think it's because, or I think to effectively answer this question, we need to recognize that each of us play a role in our information environment in two ways. One is we are consumers of information that we see online, and two is that we are producers of information that we might transmit online through our social media posts. We might transmit to others by talking in person. And so I'll break down, from each of those roles how we can make sure we're helping combat mis and disinfo. First, as consumers of information, I think the number one thing is to know what to watch out for. Um, be cognizant that not everything that you see online, not everything you see in person, like in print either, is necessarily going to be true. And I think that we should approach information with a level of healthy skepticism. Things that we should watch out for are number one, sensationalist headlines.
Mm.
Oftentimes, if you see news articles which are, you read it and it's sometimes the headlines don't necessarily match the content. Sometimes the images in the article, invoke one kind of reaction, but the actual subject matter, if you read the details, doesn't necessarily do the same thing. And then, of course,
This way,
uh,
before you
yeah,
go on,
yeah,
sensationalism,
yeah,
because that's part of that extremism in our political environment right
mhm,
now. And years ago, they in the 1930s and 40s, they used to teach reporters to do that. I took journalism, but they used to teach them to do that just to grab headlines. But what you're saying is now mis and dis information folks have gone back to that, grab them and then feed them the information that is sensationalized, whether it's true or not.
yeah, that's
Okay.
absolutely correct. I'll do a small segue and I'll come back to what I was saying, but I'm glad you bring this up, Denise. The most effective mis and disinformation campaigns are effective because they understand the nature of how we consume and transmit information. They use sensationalist headlines because they know that sensationalist headlines are what get people reading. Um,
Mhm.
there was a study that came out of MIT a couple of years ago, I think maybe in 2018, which found that um, I think it was like misleading claims on Twitter spread at a speed of like 6 times faster. And this all just boils down into how media is consumed and how if we see something that evokes a really strong reaction, we're more likely to tell others about it, to engage with that content, and so on. To Jeremy's point earlier about AI generated images, and you brought up the Biden robocalls, the reason that those are so effective is because usually we say seeing is believing. So when we see an image or video that
Mhm.
tells us one thing, or when we hear a deepfake of Joe Biden's voice, we've been prone to say, even if we have some level of healthy skepticism of the information we read online, we tell ourselves, okay, I actually heard Biden say this, or I saw an image depicting this, therefore it's true. And then finally, it's that a lot of mis and disinformation is not necessarily fabricating brand new narratives. It's taking
Mhm.
real life facts and just tweaking the details. to evoke those stronger reactions, to push that narrative farther, um, and take it farther. The best lies all have a grain of truth, is how I would sum it up. And so being cognizant of all of those things as a news consumer is going to be helpful in spotting those challenges. Two more actionable things we can do as consumers of information are: number one, get your news from reliable sources. And number three, sorry, that was number two. Number three is ideally cross-check your information. See if the information you're reading is being talked about on other websites, is being fact-checked by other websites. All those are effective means. Um, Secondly, though, talking about how you can combat mis and disinfo as a
Mhm.
producer in this information environment, I'd say the number one thing is just don't share information that you haven't verified. Um, if you
That's
see a headline that
important.
might be, yeah, if you see a headline that's sensationalist and you haven't read the article and given it an honest look, just don't pass it on to your friend. Um, Things like that can be very effective in slowing down the spread of misleading narratives online.
Mhm. That is fantastic. So I was trying to write down all of your things. Otherwise, but it's still this is all good. Don't share information until you definitely have checked the source.
Hmm.
Um, and then you also mentioned when you see something, you kind of research it out. It's kind of like checking that source, but and check the information now. At one point, we all had these places called factfindingtruth.com or something to that effect. Do you have websites, or should they go to your website, which I was going to ask you all about a little later? But where can people go in general and find information?
Yeah, I think that boils down to two things. Number one is I think everyone should have a good arsenal of reliable news sources that they get their daily information from. One interesting emerging trend is that Gen Z gets a lot of their news information from TikTok rather than from conventional news sources. That's something to be mindful of. Of course, things like posting on TikTok does not have the same journalistic standards that more notable news organizations will have. And secondly, I think folks should have a good set of fact-checking websites that are doing very, very important work, doing both qualitative or sometimes quantitative research, verifying claims that they're seeing online and determining whether they are, true or not true. So I'd say that those two things will take you really far when it comes to getting reliable information, and also helping to combat mis and disinfo.
That is fantastic. Um, I don't have time to ask you, but I'm going to ask you this. Are we ever going to get young folks who are tech savvy and wonderful and everything? Um, are we ever going to get them to take the time, though, to actually fact check? I mean, that's my, and it's not just young people. I'm afraid
Mhm.
my age group has not done their due diligence to check out if it's all this confirmation bias in the media. I'm going to
Mhm.
watch this channel because it supports my viewpoint on what I believe happened or is happening. And I don't know if we can get around that, but I would ask you the question, not that you can speak for all young people. Are we ever going to get them away from TikTok? Are we ever going to get them? I mean, my 13-year-old granddaughter, I mean,
Mhm.
she's a whiz at technology. And I thought, I was thinking about what I was doing at 13, just playing the piano and twirling a baton was fine for me. But for her, I mean, she can, she on my cell, she was 9 years old and on my phone with a Google thing. And she said, Grandma, are you going to push that? I said, push what? I said, yeah, there's some cars showing up in trucks. She said, no, it's your avatar. pick that red car. I didn't even know what it was at that time. And I said, well, why don't you pick it? It's important to you, whatever. That generation, that's even younger. I mean, that's,
Hmm.
grandparents are at least 50 years older. What can we do to get young people into actually researching um, something? I mean, what can we do? I mean, is it just because they've grown up with it? TikTok will forever, TikTok or Instagram or Twitter will forever be their news sources or something like that.
Hmm. I think that what makes things like TikTok so appealing to younger folks
Mm-hmm.
um, might be that, we grew up with it. It's kind of, digital natives, right? Like we grew up with it. We've grown up on social media. It's been there. However, I think that the reason that both young people and older people alike don't necessarily do a lot of fact checking, I think it's the same issue, which is just that fact checking has not been the easiest thing to do. Let's say you consume news from a few different places. If you regularly consume news from a news outlet, then you're already doing more than the average American is. Like if you're doing that on a daily basis. But then to go the next step and actually fact check your news, or cross check your news, there's a lot of different places that are putting out news. There's a lot of different fact checking organizations. There's a lot of
And they'll
places to visit.
contradict what you just read. And
Yeah.
that's good. Um, it's very evident that if you're looking at something in health, and and then when you see the ad, but these are the right pills or these are the right, you kind of know, okay, so that's why you're saying it. So
Hmm.
you can go to NIH site or you can go, someplace that's credible. But I
Right.
again, you mentioned, I know there's usually factcheck.com and there's some other sources. Do you
Hmm.
all provide that? And how can our audit? This has been really great, by the way. And I think you have really answered the pulse as to why this next election, about the AI and the election, we're all concerned about it. But it
Hmm.
just means we have to do our due diligence and watch out for sensationalism, and then a little common sense. Look at if someone's head is turned this way, they look like they're talking to someone, maybe even some of the lighting in the pictures that don't match or whatever. You can tell
Hmm.
someone has put it together, and then when, of course, things are humorous, somebody added eyebrows or a big hat or, those things are funny, but it
Hmm.
isn't funny when someone's trying to get you um, the wrong information. And we really appreciate what you all have done to straighten us out. Now, how can people get in? You're doing such great work. How can people get in touch with you? What would you like the last thing, our audience information you'd like to share? How can we get in touch with you?
Absolutely. Thank you, Denise. It's been a pleasure. So Jeremy and I think that the best way to get young people and just everybody fact checking their news is to make it as easy as possible. Um, for the last year, we've been working on a product with the League of Women Voters Virginia called Election Facts, and it is a one-stop shop for fact checking your election news. We do real-time tracking of fact check reports put out by leading nonpartisan organizations like Snopes, PolitiFact, Fact Check, and Lead Stories. We put it all in one place. We make it extremely easy for you to search up different narratives, different stories that you might have heard that you weren't sure if they're true or not. And we'll
Mhm.
show you what, the country's leading fact checking organizations are saying about it. So that's available at verbaai.org/election_facts. And if anyone would like to get in touch, you can also contact us at info@verbaai.org.
Okay, so I'm going to try to repeat that back. Info at Berber?
LWV-AI.org.
At spell the Berber for us.
Sure thing.
B-U,
It's V
oh,
E.
V. Okay. V is in Victor.
That's right.
Okay.
V as in Victor,
Sorry.
E as in elephant, R as in Rachel,
Okay.
B as in boy,
Mm-hmm.
A as in alpha,
Mm-hmm.
A as in alpha,
Uh-huh.
I as in indigo.
Okay. This is great. .org or .com?
Dot, .org.
This is fantastic. Well, we are very, very fortunate that you have decided to come on our little program today and inform people about mis and disinformation and making us a little bit aware of some of the things that go. I had no idea that things spread faster on Twitter and that kind of thing. And thank you so much for being a part of this. And you all have a pleasant day. Thank you.